Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our springtime Alexis to Tocqueville Luncheon, and we are absolutely delighted that you could all be here.
Today, I'd really like to talk to you about some of the ways that our work is changing and some of the new things that we're learning about in terms of how we drive outcomes, particularly for children in our communities. One of our big learning experiences over the last 5 years has been that as passionate as we are about children, if we want to help our children, and this is true about Manchester, it's true about New Hampshire as a whole, we also have to think about how we help adults and the adults in their lives. The most powerful way to drive out poverty and to drive up outcomes for children is to think about how we have a dual generation or a multi-generation strategy, where we're thinking about the adults whose lives they're engaged with and the children at the same time. I run some pretty sad numbers in front of you for just a moment. 1 in 5 children are living under the poverty line in Manchester right now. When we look at children on free or reduced lunch, so that next tier, including the next tier up of kids in financial instability, more than 1 in 2. We know that at least 25% of our elementary school students citywide are habitually truant, meaning that they miss 10 or more days in a year. When you're 6 and 7 years old, that has an incredible impact on your ability to learn and grow. About 40% of students right now across the state are considered off track in reading, about 50% in math. Those numbers nearly, particularly for reading, nearly double. And in Manchester, they're about 150 times higher, or 1.5, or about 50% higher, I'm sorry. In the past 2 years, just to speak to what we all know is a major health problem in the city, more than 200 children have been born addicted to narcotics in the city's 2 largest hospitals. That rate is more than double what it has been prior to the major epidemic. About 13% of the adults living in our city do not have a high school diploma or equivalent. They are twice as likely to be living in poverty when compared to those with a high school diploma. And we also know that for those who get a diploma, they often don't have the skills they need to move on to higher education. Manchester Community Colleges reports between 40 and 50% of their incoming student population is not ready to sit into a college class. So we know that all the things you saw in that video are definitely true for our communities, particularly in Manchester. So when we started thinking about what we needed to do and how we would start moving the needle for kids and families in the city, we had to think about not only what services we could partner with folks to provide in the city, but also ways that we could empower the adults in their lives and give some tools and some skills to the adults in their lives in order to sort of double down on that outcome. So one of those things that we really worked with the Manchester School District on is something called Leader in Me. And Leader in Me, for those of you who are Stephen Covey fans of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Leader in Me is a curriculum that's designed for elementary school students as young as kindergarten to start learning those 7 habits very, very early in their lives and start implementing them and learning some of those self-management skills. So we partnered with 2 elementary schools in the city of Manchester to do that skill development for kids in the most struggling neighborhoods in the city. And it's an incredible program, but it's a great example of how partnering with an unusual suspect. We usually don't think about partnering with schools to do this work. We think about traditionally partnering with our local agencies, and so partnering with sort of the unusual suspects and giving another toolkit to teachers has really changed how those kids are progressing. Another way that we've done that is through something that we've talked about for a number of years, and that's the Reading Plus program. So Reading Plus is a technology-based, a cloud-based reading solution that helps kids who are a little bit older, grades 3 through 12, learn how to read more effectively. Again, it was another way that we partnered with school districts to reach kids and to start addressing the critical issue of reading, but do it in partnership with a different entity than we normally work with. So we have worked with several school districts throughout our state. We have seen nearly 1,500 children improve their reading as a part of this. The last statistic, those first 3 years that we were doing this program, over 500 students went from off track to on track in their reading scores, which for me is a huge reminder that this is a reset button for them. This is an opportunity to get back on track and to move forward, and doing that in partnership with our local school districts has been incredibly rewarding. This just gives you an idea of where kids came from and where they went. So we saw a significant chunk of students at the move up from that initial grade level, where some of them were 5 or more grades behind. We actually had students who were 7 grades behind get back on track in a year as a part of this program. So that's incredibly, incredibly powerful work. Another way that we're sort of working with different partners in unique spaces is through our Community Schools project. For those of you who don't know a ton about community schools really means taking a local school, or in this case 2 elementary schools, Beach Street and Gosler Park schools in Manchester, and turning those schools inside out. So instead of those schools opening up at 7 o'clock in the morning, closing up at 3 o'clock, and only being there for children, it turns them into a community hub. It turns them into a community center where everybody can come and learn and grow and build a community within that school. We have partnered with several agencies across the city to co-locate services, to bring services right on site at those community schools, including parent education, resident leadership development, financial literacy, and employability skills. Last week we had our first high school graduates come out of our elementary school. We had 3 adult learners who came in and sat down and took the HiSET test for the first time, and so we actually have our first high school graduates from Beach Street and Gosler Park Elementary School through this effort. This is new, this is different, this is partnering in a different way for kids and families, and the exciting news is that it's starting to put us on the map. We had, last week we also had the privilege of going to Vancouver for the United Way Worldwide Conference, where we were recognized with honorable mention among United Ways across the country for our community schools effort. And we had several United Ways come to us and say, we are trying to do this in their communities. How did you do this, and how can we learn from this process? And all of this is about thinking about how we look to improve things for kids and things for families by partnering in different ways and going after the usual and the unusual suspects to make this work happen.